impacting residents. Is that being coordinated well enough as well? I'm just slightly worried now.
I think we always have room for improvement, and what I would perhaps try and push forward is
make sure we have a clear system of how patients are invited in, and I'm sure the Minister probably has a greater oversight of that, and will be working to ensure that it's as smooth as possible.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully some of my colleagues will pick up these points. My time is out.
Thank you very much. We move on to the next supplementary lead question, and that is from Assembly Member Boff.
Mr. Coffey, do you agree with the priority list published by the Joint Committee on Vaccinations and Immunisation? Is it the right list?
So the list reduce the risk of getting serious illness and dying, rather than who do we vaccinate to reduce transmission categories, both to see is there any group they should include in their category, and secondly, are there any groups they want to prioritise for the next wave. So what I'm asking them, I'm giving them the evidence that I've seen as both an opportunity and a higher risk of comorbidity to consider this group. And they will then decide whether they would wish to prioritise that within their present 9 and add that to it, or they'll use that to decide on their next phase. And it's for them to consider. I'm not privy to how they're going to do the next stage at the moment.
And will you be providing data to support those representations?
Yes, we can. So therefore, one programme which shows the opportunity, and I might share this with you today, is that so under the plans of everyone in, we will manage to do some outreach hepatitis C testing on 1,100 patients. Of that, we found, in fact, that 11% were hep C positive, 7% had active infection, and we managed to persuade 43 to start treatment of hepatitis C. Previously, those patients would never have been tested, would never have found they had hepatitis C, and they would now not be on treatment. So we've got evidence how we can actually use this opportunity in time to work with this very vulnerable group to do a health. Martin McRae, the medical director, and the chief executive of the NHS in London, we have a weekly meeting when we go through all the emerging evidence which might change any position we might take, and the emerging epidemiological information on what's happening with the virus and the NHS data. So therefore, we try to bring those three elements of advice into one place. We're meeting today, in fact, at 2 o'clock, and that allows the Mayor to be fully briefed on the epidemiology, on the emerging evidence, and also on the NHS position. So that's how we have done that very much on a weekly basis for many months. And when new information comes through, either by SAGE, by academic experts, by colleagues like Martin from the NHS, that is fed into to the Mayor for him to be appropriately informed.
It didn't work though, did it? Back in March of last year, the Mayor was publicly saying that you couldn't catch COVID on a train. I mean, it's clearly wrong. We know that not to be the case now. So have we looked at those the shortfalls and made adjustments to ensure that the public health advice is better?
Yeah. So I think, what happens over time, especially in a very fast-moving situation, the evidence evolves. And I think in March and February of last year, COVID was considered very much a droplet infection transmission. And I think over time, we realised very much it's an aerosol-driven infection as well. And the evidence that we were getting from public health, from the wider science community, was the evidence that the Mayor was given. And the Mayor wishes to be led by scientific and public health advice. He takes that and then articulates that accordingly. So the information and advice that he was given in February and March was that which was within the scientific community at the time.
So when the Mayor comes to make representations about certain groups rather than anything else?
No. So the Mayor will take on board all elements of scientific advice, be it virological, via epidemiological, public health issues, NHS impacts. So there isn't a single source of information which is only used by the mayor. Understandably, he will take a wider breadth of scientific input, and which does change over time. And quite rightly, we need to be open to new and emerging scientific advice and evidence, and that is what the mayor will use. So it wouldn't just be, I will only use advice from my public health experts. He will use it from his regional nurse experts, or the medical director, or the. So it's very much wide. I wouldn't say there's a single source of wisdom on COVID-19. One has to get the best available collective information, up to date wherever possible, and that's what we try to do with the mayor.
So if the mayor comes forward in future with recommendations that particular groups are prioritised, he will be able to back that up with public health data. Is that correct?
He will be able to back it up with data from a wide array of sources, including public health, NHS, both about, is that person likely to transmit an infection? Is that person likely to become ill from that infection? Is that person in a public-facing role? So there's a multiplicity of information sources which he will understandably use accordingly. And I would always support him to do that, rather than taking a single view from a single piece of evidence. It's best to get a wide array as possible and make sure it's peer-reviewed, test it with colleagues, and test it with the wider London team. I think during this COVID epidemic, before I would have always said to colleagues, Sadiq tries to champion and challenge the NHS. I think this time the new C is collaborate. So Sadiq, very much with the NHS, we champion, we challenge, and we collaborate. And I think collaboration around the evidence that, Andrew, that you would wish to see is what he tries to do wherever possible.
Thank you.
Right. May I please at this juncture stop our current question session, because I'm pleased to say that the Minister has arrived and he's with us. So can I give a warm welcome to the Minister, and on behalf of the Assembly, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate that can only join us for a short while, I believe for about half an hour. So I would like to call Assembly members to pose their questions to you. We have allocated half an hour for question answer session. So the first question is from Assembly Member Sean Berry.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming here, Minister. I've been looking at particularly the £23 million that was allocated by the government to local authorities and charities last week on the 25th of January. This money for community champions to give vaccine advice and boost the take-up. Now, it seems, looking at the lists, it seems that some of the boroughs within London who have not received money are some of the boroughs that have some of the highest, in terms of number, populations of minority ethnic groups, and some of the most deprived boroughs. I can see Enfield, Croydon, Southwark, Newham, Barking, Dagenham, Tower Hamlets. They've not received any money from your department. So I'm just wondering if you can tell me more about the decision making that went on.
Programme as COO, reporting into Emily Lawson, who is the overall senior responsible officer for the vaccine deployment programme. So very happy to take away any concerns that you might have. Essentially, it's 23 million to work with local government to identify local leaders.
And sorry to interrupt, I'm very short of time. Will there be another allocation of funding that comes forward to fill these gaps?
Well, we always look at other additional resources if we need to, not just through local government, but also directly to some of these community groups who we think are doing really worthwhile work. This is an important, as I'm sure you've seen, I've been spending a lot of time working across party, because this transcends party politics. And I pay tribute to my colleagues, both from the South Asian community in Parliament and the Black and Afro-Caribbean community, who've both really sort of risen to the challenge when I wrote to them to say, I need your help to get the message out. And I think both videos have gone viral of MPs encouraging people to take the jab when it's their turn. But we will always look at what more we can do to drive this message home.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. I'm afraid you are out of time. Good morning, Minister. We'll now move on to the next question, and that is from Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you very much. Minister, we know there is much concern over the so-called South African variant. My worry is that these concerns could lead to a noticeable decrease in vaccine take-up. At St George's Hospital in Tooting yesterday, 1 in 10 people did not turn up for their vaccine. Is this a trend you're noticing in London? And what are you doing to assure the public that the vaccines are effective against this variant as well?
Thank you very much, Assembly Member Pigeon. So Patrick Vallance, the Chief Scientific Advisor to the government, and Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, and his Deputy, Jonathan Van Tam, all quite rightly believe they'd be very surprised if the current vaccines weren't effective on the Kent variant or the South African variant. We've seen some data from some of our later vaccines that are going to come online, Novavax, for example, and Janssen, where they've conducted trials in South Africa, where they've shown some good efficacy on those variants. There are about 4,000 variants now worldwide, and we have in the UK probably one of the best genome sequencing ecosystems in the world. We account for about just under 50% of gene sequencing of the virus, and we're keeping a library of that, working with obviously the different groups. You heard from the Oxford group yesterday about looking at improving their vaccine, Pfizer, BioNTech, doing the same thing as is Moderna, which is the third vaccine that's been approved. So we continue to deploy the vaccines that we have available to us at pace, of course, with accuracy. But the sort of ultimate test is the Public Health England work that they're doing with a project in care homes, which is the Vivaldi test survey, and then the Siren survey with frontline healthcare workers. We'll see a report very soon in terms of both infection and transmissibility. But all I would say, vaccines protect you and, of course, protect your community.
Thank you, Minister. We are out of time with this question. Next question is from Assembly Member Boff.
Minister, the government approved the life-saving vaccines in a record time, provided the resources for the NHS to start a vaccination programme that is the envy of the world and is now on track to protect the most vulnerable millions, giving hope that families can be reunited and that life can get back to normal. Do you regret not following the advice of Sir Keir Starmer to remain part of the European Medical Agency?
Thank you, Andrew. Look, ultimately, I think the Vaccines Task Force, Kate Bingham's leadership, and I have to say, and it's worth placing this on record, it is Patrick Vallance's brainchild, and he is a modest man, doesn't like taking credit for much, but he absolutely should be credited for the Vaccines Task Force coming together. We have some of the best scientists in the UK and the best technicians and industrialists in vaccine manufacture in the UK. We didn't have a big manufacturing base, which we invested in as well, in making sure that we are able, once the Oxford team had done their work, if they had been successful, so that we can manufacture at scale, as we're doing with Novavax, as we're doing with Valneva in Scotland. And so vaccines will be made in Oxfordshire, on Teesside and in Scotland. It was the right decision to make because we engaged with the European Commission at the time. And I remember very distinctly Kate Bingham, because we used to speak almost every night just to catch up saying to me that their conditions is we had to drop all of our negotiations, which we had engaged in months before the European team had done, and had to hand over all the negotiations over, and that was not the thing that we wanted to do, and therefore we declined their offer and focused on our own bilateral negotiations, which I think have led to an incredible success story, both in terms of discovery. People forget that there was over 130, 150 different groups saying they're going to get the vaccine. And we've got a brilliant team of experts to tell us which vaccines had the best possible chance of success. And I think that's been rewarded. We've got 407 million doses on order, and I'm confident that we will continue to deploy at pace, of course, targeting the most vulnerable first. That 1 to 4 is 88% of mortality. 1 to 9 in the JCVI list is 99% of mortality. So my laser-like focus is to make sure we protect those people first and then move on to protecting the whole of the country.
Thank you, Minister.
Can I invite a question from Assembly Member Bailey?
Good morning, Minister. It's great to see you, and thank you for the hard work. What I'm particularly focused on, the government has done a lot of work around combating the spreading of fake news, bad information, particularly in the ethnic communities. Of course, my own community, I've seen a lot of very fake news being spread around, telling people not to take the vaccine. It'll impact their health negatively. You've done some good work in it. My thing is, what more can be done? What other steps do the government have planned? And how can we here on the Assembly help with that process?
I'm very grateful for the question, Sean. It's a great question. So vaccine acceptance in the UK is the highest in the world, and I'm very proud of that. And that's, I think, driven by both the science and then the discovery and people just feeling confident that the UK is doing the right thing. The ONS survey, the Office for National Statistics, suggests 85% of adults will take a vaccine. Now, that's great on its own, but the 15%, which you quite rightly identify, skew heavily towards BAME communities, and especially the Black and Afro-Caribbean community, which I am concerned about. And I look forward to working with you and other colleagues on this. We're working, one, to identify people, because we now publish ethnicity data as well as part of the NHS publication that we do on a weekly basis. And of course, we've published the daily data as well. We're sharing information with local government. We'll be sharing it at ward level so that we can identify those groups. Eleanor Kelly's doing a lot of work, and Sian Berry mentioned the Community Champions Programme. That's £23 million going into identifying community leaders, both faith leaders, ethnic community groups that we think we really need to make sure we communicate with. It was great to see the Prime Minister go to Batley and the Hikmah Islamic Centre, where they're now reaching, I think, 97% of over 80s in Yorkshire, which is phenomenal. We want to see the same happen in London and everywhere else in the country, because it's those hard-to-reach groups. When the virus has no one to spread into, because most of the adult population is vaccinated, it will try and find those groups that are unprotected. And that's my big fear, is once it gets into particular communities, it will go through them like wildfire, and that's what I want to prevent, which is why we're working so hard on this. And I'll be saying some more in Parliament in the coming days and weeks on how we're delivering.
Thank you, Minister. What will be really interesting is when it gets down to ward level data, because people on the Assembly and councils will really be able to help with that process, approaching those groups and getting some help there. But thank you for your answer. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Next question is from Assembly Member Devenish.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning. Thank you for all the hard work you're doing. I'd like to pay tribute to my two London boroughs, RBKC and Westminster, for all the work they have been doing with you. So thank you. My question is quite blunt, Minister. Will you work with the Mayor and the Met to make sure we prosecute the malicious anti-vaxxer propaganda that we are facing here in London? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member Devenish. Can I add my thanks to the leadership at KNC and at Westminster, who have done a tremendous job in both the overall vaccination programme, but also in identifying hard-to-reach groups. I agree with you on some of the anti-vaxxers and those who are breaking the law in any way. Then we should be going after the lawbreakers. We've got a unit across government in the Cabinet Office which launched in March, which is a sort of COVID disinformation unit that works across the board with all the technology platforms. So as soon as we identify any fake news, which Assemblymember Bailey referred to, then we can immediately reach out to Twitter or Facebook or anyone else, and they should take it down immediately because some of this information is worrying. Although our focus at the moment is the top 1 to 4 categories, and that's the over 80s and of course then the over 75s and over 70s. Some of this information is really sort of their grandchildren and their children and their cousins, and I see even.
Thank you very much. And is there anything else Sadiq Khan himself could do? He's not here again today. He's missed 4 plenaries on COVID and the economy. I'd like him to be more visible in London. Is there anything you think he should be doing? Gary Neville, who's a Labour Party supporter, actually said the mayor's been invisible for the last 12 months.
Well, this transcends politics, and I have to say, I want to try and work in a cross-party way to make sure that we get the message across to all communities. And I want to continue to work with Sadiq Khan as I would work with Andy Street and others to make sure that we deliver a successful vaccine deployment program. We've gone through the 10 million mark. I've got to get to 15 million by mid-February. And so we've got our work cut out, and then keep going beyond that because top 1 to 4 categories, 88% of mortality. The 1 to 9 categories in phase 1 is 99% of mortality. If you take that and move the clock forward 3 weeks, we should see a real impact on hospitalisation and ultimately death, which is why this is such a race against death, which is why we really all should be pulling in the same direction.
Thank you, Minister. You've done a great job. Thank you, Chair. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Can we move on to question from Assembly Member Dr. Sahota?
Actually, Chair, sorry, I'm just swapping with Dr. Sahota because he's got a couple of things, so it will run more smoothly if he takes them both together. Sorry about that.
No problem at all. Thank you.
So it's Assembly Member Cooper here. It's good to see you, Alderman Zahawi. I've sat in front of that sign for some time. So my concern is, of course, about the new strains because Pollard's Hill in Merton is one of the areas, and obviously getting 10,000 tests done in a very local area. Is that going to spread out to adjoining areas if we start to find that it is sort of loose in the community? I am concerned because I understand that the one person identified came from a test that was conducted before Christmas. So obviously it could be the South African strain could be quite widely out in the community. Appreciate your.
We need to make sure that we put in the resource, and now that we've got the ability, if you look at where test and trace was and where it is today, and of course that is now so that we understand exactly what these strains are doing, both in terms of control, but also we're also working, as I said earlier, with the manufacturers to make sure that we are, fit for purpose for any outcome. There are 4,000 strains now worldwide, and as I said, I think we will get to a place, which is why we're sort of thinking ahead, that we will probably be vaccinating annually, or there may be a boost in the autumn to make sure we continue to protect both the most vulnerable, but also the adult population of the United Kingdom.
Completely understand that, and I imagine that we'll also be using some of the 2-metre distancing and masks and things going forward to carry on control. But just on your point about the variants that are sort of loose internationally, obviously there's been a lot of talk about trying to prevent new, more transmissible variants coming in. and we're talking here about the South African variant, but there are others as well. And I just wondered if you were able to comment on issues like negotiating with hotels so that we can get really good quarantine arrangements in place. Obviously, Australia and New Zealand have been and South Korean places have been very strong on these areas. We've perhaps, I mean, I think the vaccination is going very well, but I think there have been issues about maybe we should have done that earlier. Are we going to be doing that? Are we going to be restricting more countries than is currently being talked about? Because people from South Africa go via Dubai, you know, that sort of thing. Plus, there are variants in other countries. If you could give us your latest information on that. Thank you.
Absolutely. So obviously, we continue to review our border policy, as other nations have done as well. So Germany and Canada, when the new variants were discovered, changed their border policy in January, as did we in terms of restricting the passenger locator form, where airlines now will actually turn you away if you don't have a passenger locator form, which allows us to know exactly where you are when you enter the country. You have to quarantine for 10 days. I think the fines now that run into about 44,000, and I don't apologise for that, because I think it's important that we actually, you know, make sure we police the system properly, and you're seeing much greater you know, policing in both ports and airports. The hotel quarantine is part of that overall system, and that will come in. So the operationalising of that, you don't have to wait for long, because the Secretary for Health tomorrow will be a statement on this to Parliament to be able to set out the operational side of the hotel quarantining, which is an addition in terms of our border controls as we continue to drive the vaccination programme every day, every week. You know, get to that middle of February, protect the top 4 cohorts, then keep moving 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and then phase 2.
But obviously, from the London perspective, because we have so many airports and so many international travellers, it's such an important issue. So I wanted to raise that, although I'm conscious it does go into slightly into other departmental areas. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to pass back, and thanks for being so flexible with me coming in before Dr. Sahota. Thank you, Nadhim Zahawi.
Thank you. Okay, now it is time for Dr. Sahota, Assembly Member, to raise your question, please.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, thank you for coming and joining us this morning. The success of any vaccination program relies upon the willingness of people to actually have the vaccine. When trust was lost on the MMR, we knew that the uptake plummeted. And as you know, that we need to get about 80% of the population vaccinated to get herd immunity. You also have a contract between two parties, in this case, the government and the people. Whilst the people trust the scientists and the doctors, the government has often ignored the advice of the scientists. For example, maybe on late lockdowns on 1, 2, and 3. Delay in getting the right PPE to the frontline staff at the right time, or not closing schools and universities when SAGE advised them to do so, or promising that Christmas will be all right, but the government knew very well that it wouldn't be all right because we had a variant in Kent going around the country, or not controlling our airports and borders when SAGE asked to do so. So all in all, the public has low confidence and trust in the handling of the pandemic of the government so far, and for some good reason.
difficult pandemic for every country in the world, Doctor. And as we spoke about earlier, other countries, whether it's Germany or Canada, having to adjust their border policy rapidly, and of course now their vaccination programs as well. So there's very high levels of acceptance of vaccines. I want to go even further, but I want to go even higher. I want to be even more ambitious, because those 15% who are vaccine hesitant, I'm reaching to those people with your help, with my colleagues from different South Asian communities and from the Black and Afro-Caribbean communities, and indeed the Mayor of London and others, to make sure we give that confidence. The best way of doing it, where I will agree with you, is through medical practitioners, the GP, the community nurse, the community pharmacy. I went to visit a brilliant community pharmacy in Edgware, a brilliant team there that were doing the vaccinations, and you could just see it for yourself. They're so embedded in their community. They knew each and every person. People were queuing up to have their vaccines. The volunteers were all local to them. So I think I'm more optimistic, dare I say, than you are on this, and I hope together we can make this happen.
Thank you for that response, Mr. And of course, only before you came here, we were told London was doing very badly on the vaccination rate compared to the rest of the country, because trust was a big issue. But anyway, I'll leave that part for the moment. The other, of course, thing is that UK is the only country that's gone for the first vaccine right, okay, and has differed right. I'm particularly talking about the Pfizer vaccine, okay. There's evidence about the AstraZeneca, right? But on Pfizer, we have extended the gap between the first and second dose, which is not supported by the international community, and certainly the WHO has said that there's no evidence for that. But I'm particularly concerned with people who gave consent right in December for the first and second vaccine to be given 21 days. Do you think we broke our trust with those people who gave the consent right to have the second vaccine within 21 days, and then the GPs were asked right at short notice to bring out all this patient, to explain the change of policy, which was inconsistent with what the manufacturers said? Do you think that trust was undermined on that occasion?
So, I mean, the way I would answer that is in two parts. Part one is I was speaking to a GP practice in Watford to congratulate them on how well they're and he said, please take the message back that the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, and his deputy, Jonathan Van Tam, did exactly the right thing in terms of recommending, with the Chief Medical Officers of Wales, of Scotland, of Northern Ireland. So this is not party political in any way. As you know, obviously, in Wales, Scotland, there is a different government. One in Wales is a Labour administration that's delivering the vaccination programme, and of course, the SNP government in Scotland. And he said, because ultimately the Chief Medical Officer has to make a decision on the evidence. The evidence comes from the Joint Committee for Vaccination and Immunisation. These are the UK experts. Some of them will be recognised as world experts. And of course, our regulator, which is independent of government, June Rain and her team at the MHRA are totally independent of government. Now, the regulator, the Joint Committee, and the 4 CMOs all agree to the dosing schedule for Pfizer-BioNTech being up to 12 weeks. And that's exactly what I'm deploying. And so, rather than say to you, I have an opinion of this, I don't. I rely on the expert advice of the Joint Committee, the regulator, and the CMOs on this.
Okay. And Mr., can we guarantee that people who were given the first Pfizer in December will get the second dose of Pfizer if they need it? And they will need it, yes.
Of course, absolutely, Doctor. So the NHS, which I think is a fantastic, I think it's the best in the world. Some will say it's world leading, one of the best in the world. I still think it's the best in the world. The NHS will do this as they do with other vaccination programs, although this is the largest vaccination program in the history of the NHS, but will absolutely deliver. So if you've had Pfizer, you'll get Pfizer your second dose. If you had Oxford AstraZeneca, you'll get Oxford AstraZeneca as your second dose.
Thank you, Mr. And just my last question. Of course, as you've heard previously, that the first case for the South African variant tested in this country was on the 29th of December 2020. We've only just started rolling out the mass PCR testing for these asymptomatic to see how the virus is spread along in the communities. And of course, we're asking asymptomatic people to go for the test and then if they are tested positive, to go into isolation, but they will be getting no benefit from it, okay? Distrust has been broken there, because why would people who are asymptomatic go for a test, and if they get test positive, they're going to be isolated for 10 days, and they will get no benefit for it? Isn't that a disincentive for people to come forward to not get tested and undermine the whole program of the PCR mass testing program, which we rolled out to find out the prevalence of the South African variant?
Well, first of all, Doctor, those who test positive, who do need the additional help, there is the hardship fund, which delivers £500 to people who need that additional financial help, plus additional money that's gone to local government to use their discretion to help those who may not be eligible for the hardship fund. And of course, the other element of that is that enforcement and the system that we have in place, I think, is working and working well. We can always learn and do better, hence why we're introducing the hotel quarantine that Assembly Member Cooper asked me about earlier. But I think a combination of all the support we've put into the economy, and the Chancellor's put £280 billion into the economy, with another 55 billion for this year. The IMF, and you can look up this quote, has said that the United Kingdom has one of the best and most comprehensive economic support programs in the world to combat the pandemic, which we're all experiencing.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm afraid Labour Group is out of time. We have a very, very quick question. I think there's about 15 or so seconds left from Assembly Member Boff.
Is it important to complete the JCVI priority list as is?
Very important, Andrew, because they looked at all aspects of the vaccination programme, including BAME communities, they looked at professions, looked at ONS data. They felt very clearly on the side that the evidence for those who are most, and they will respond to us with their advice, and we will follow that advice in phase 2.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister Zahawi, I know this morning already you had a very busy schedule. I've heard you on LBC, I've seen you on Sky TV, and you're here this morning with us. I can't thank you enough. May I just, on behalf of the Assembly, if you can spare another minute, ask you a question of reassurance that we are seeking on behalf of Londoners, and that is London now receiving its fair share of COVID-19 vaccinations, and can we be confident that it will continue to do so over the coming months?
Excuse me, Chair. Sorry to butt in, Chair. You haven't allocated me time for the Brexit.
We have indeed allocated the time. I know that we've been chasing, the officers have been chasing you for any input that you might want to make, and only a couple of seconds, 3-4 seconds ago, I was still told that they haven't heard from you. Thus, I haven't called you. I'm very happy to call you if Minister has the time, and yeah, no problem at all. So, Minister, are you able to very quickly respond to my time, and then if you have my question, and then if you have time, a question from Assembly Member Curtin?
Absolutely. Why don't we take Assembly Member Curtin's question? I'll respond to both questions because I've got to wrap up. I've got to get to the House because I'm making a statement to the House of.
I appreciate that. Just a reassurance as I've sought from you. Thank you. Can you answer?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. You said yesterday in a tweet the vaccines are safe and have been rigorously tested, but there is a lot of evidence of serious adverse health effects. For example, in Norway, there were 23 people who died in a care home after the Pfizer vaccine, and in this country, there's been an increase in care homes.
You shouldn't be giving a platform to scaremongering.
Sorry, I heard someone else saying something. Is that?
I think I get the gist of the question, David. I can answer that question and Assembly Member Shah's question as well. I'm very grateful to you both. So, David, to your question, the Norwegian health service looked at that particular case and concluded that actually it was not linked to the vaccination programme. In the UK, just that you know, we have a very rigorous recording of adverse events in vaccination, not run by the government, not run by the NHS, but run by the regulator, the MHRA. It's called the Yellow Card System, and the MHRA publishes, and will continue to do so, the adverse events when it comes to vaccination. We've now vaccinated, or at least given the first dose, to over 10 million people, and vaccines are safe. Both vaccines went through rigorous phase 1, 2, and 3 processes. June Rain, the head of the MHRA, made it very clear there was no corners cut, no shortcuts. The only difference was they paralleled the phases because so much resource was put in place to allow for that to happen. And so they are incredibly safe. They're good for you. They protect you. They protect your family and your community. To Assemblymember Shah's question, 2 questions. Yes and yes, you will continue to receive your fair share of vaccine doses for completing the 1 to 4 categories by the middle of February. That is a commitment from me and from the NHS. And then beyond that, you will continue to receive your fair share to be able to complete the categories 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and then we move to phase 2. Our only limiting, obviously, factor is vaccine supply, but I now have very clear line of sight all the way through to the end of March, week by week, of what we have coming in. And of course, we've got other vaccines that will come on board in the spring. So we've got millions of doses, tens of millions of doses coming through, and I'm confident that together we will do this and we'll vaccinate.
On a very positive note, Minister, and on behalf of the Assembly, I thank you very much for sparing your time and answering questions diligently. Thank you very much, and have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, colleagues, let's resume our question and answer session. Assembly Member Buff, you were in the middle of asking your question. Are you done, or do you want to continue with your question before the Minister came?
I'm happy for others to come in first, sir, and I'll pick up later on.
Right, let me see who is next in that case. After you, I have Assembly Member Curtin on the list. Before I call Assembly Member Curtin, let me make it very, very clear. I have personally, as well as officers, have been trying all this morning until about 5 or so minutes ago to see whether you wanted to come in and ask a question to the Mayor. Unfortunately, we heard nothing, and that is the clear explanation as to why you were not called. Can you please, for the future, try and help us to help you to ask questions should you be interested in a timely manner? Assembly Member Curtin, can you ask your question, please? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask, Martin McRae, if I could, back to the people who were here before. You refer to the vaccine, or the injections that people have been given from Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Moderna vaccines. However, the substances from Pfizer and Moderna are not vaccines as people understand vaccines. They are experimental mRNA gene technologies. Why do you continue to refer to those two substances and injections as vaccines?
Thanks, Assembly Member. I'm not a scientist or a virologist, I'm a nurse. But the MHRA who regulate the vaccines describe the two vaccines we use in London, AstraZeneca, Oxford, and the Pfizer-BioNTech, as vaccines. So,
are you aware that there has been an increase in weekly deaths in care homes in the UK from the week that the vaccine was began to be rolled out on the 8th of December by actually nearly 400%, from 444 in the week beginning the 4th of December to 1,705 in the last week of January. And what does that say about the safety of the vaccines?
So I don't recognise the figures. You'd have to tell me where they came from. We monitor on a weekly basis the deaths in care homes and other care settings in two ways. One is through a reporting mechanism through our local adult social services teams and local authorities, and then subsequently through ONS data that comes about 4 weeks later. We've seen no rise over this awful second wave of COVID in total of excess deaths for this time of year. Now, that's not like we saw back in March and April in the first wave, when we did see more people dying than we'd expect to die on a week-by-week basis. And we think that that's down to two reasons. One is because the care and our scientific understanding to inform that care of COVID is so much greater now, we're able to look after people very well. Secondly, the extra measures we've taken in place, particularly around infection prevention and control, hands, face, space in layman's language, make sure that we reduce the number of deaths from this awful disease. I haven't seen, and I'm happy to look at data if you want to send it to me, a rise, as you describe, in deaths in care homes since the vaccine started.
Okay, well, thank you for your answer. I mean, I didn't specifically ask you about excess deaths. That's a different thing. But yeah, but maybe you don't have the figures from deaths in care homes in front of you. But I'm very glad to hear from you that you say that excess deaths are not greater than normal. That's very good to hear. And maybe that's a good reason to end the lockdown. Okay, thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
I'll hand back.
Now we move on to the other supplementary questions on the list. Can we start?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to start with my questions to Martin. I'd like to ask you about the take-up of the vaccine amongst blind and visually impaired people. Some serious concerns were raised on the Radio 4 In Touch programme last week and have been powerfully highlighted by RNIB relating to the challenges in accessing information and travelling to get the vaccine. So in terms of getting the vaccine, I understand why places like the Excel Centre are being used for vaccinations, but travelling when blind is at the best times can be a huge challenge. But many blind and visually impaired people have lost some mobility skills and confidence during the pandemic. And the Excel, for example, is a place where many blind people may be unfamiliar, and the DLR has very few staff to provide assistance. So can every step be taken to ensure that blind and visually impaired people are invited to a local venue for their vaccinations?
Yeah, so can I pick up quickly on 3 points? I will go and see if I have data on that particular group. I'd be surprised if I do, but if I do, I will write to you and let you know. Secondly, it highlights, doesn't it, the real challenge that people living their day-to-day lives in their lived experience have with trying to accommodate a national programme, and therefore local flexibility and making sure, back to Dr. Jamil's point in the beginning and others, that we have local opportunities for people to pick up the vaccine is really important. And people in this group particularly have familiar routes to go to. Yes. And that's really, really important. But what your question does is highlight the structural unfairness that exists in society over many other things, and the vaccine shines a light on that. The third thing is, and you said when they're invited, and we had a conversation about confusion around letters. So let's be really clear. If you're over 70 and you haven't yet been contacted, I want you to go to ring 119 and book an appointment. And that can be with your local pharmacist, or go online, search online for vaccine appointments and book an appointment where it suits you and get that vaccine. If you're a member of staff, and that won't be in the main, though there are some of our care staff who are blind and visually impaired, they have been offered that vaccine. We encourage them to take it up in their local healthcare setting where they're familiar. And thirdly, if you are clinically extreme care worker who they work with already, to get that appointment in a place that suits them. And that's the important point I think you're trying to make.
Lovely, thank you. And will the NHS in London make sure that communication needs, which are held on health records because of the accessible information standard, are followed in all correspondence with blind and visually impaired people to ensure they get the right information?
That would be my expectation of all my colleagues working in all those healthcare settings, and I'll reinforce that to them.
Lovely. And Farah, as one of the GPs, I've only got a few seconds left, but can you assure me that you are working carefully with this particular group of Londoners?
Absolutely, and I think you're right to shine that spotlight on patients more generally with disabilities, and the importance that you bring about that local approach, that familiar approach, and what role the GPs, their general practice, their pharmacy, their community setting can play in their onward care.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair, may I just give some data to a question raised by Assembly Member Curtin, please?
You can do so. Could you please do that in writing to Assembly Member Curtin?
It was just to highlight the numbers in care homes, in fact, is dropping at the moment, not rising. The figures in London have gone from 777 on the 22nd of January, now it's only 541. Just saying, so the care home data, as the vaccine programme is rolled out, is reducing in London, not increasing.
Okay, thank you for your answer. My question was from the 4th of December to the 22nd of January. You've answered for a different period since then, so I'm glad to hear that from the 22nd of January onwards, which is what I didn't ask about that. I'm glad to hear that the death rate is dropping now. Thank you for that data.
Thank you. Move on from that. Next question is from myself. So can I request Deputy Chair to take control for my question?
Please go ahead, Chairman. Go ahead.
Right. My question is on vaccination hesitancy in BAME communities. And to start with, I'd like to address my question to Dr. Coffey. According to the Royal Society of Public Health, only 57% of BAME people would be willing to take COVID-19 vaccine, in comparison with 79% of white people. In particular, confidence is reportedly lowest amongst black communities, with some reports of 72% not willing to take the vaccine. The spread of the misinformation and conspiracy theories via social media networks can be identified as one of the causes of this. What can the mayor and local authorities do to counter misinformation and bolster confidence in vaccine to BAME communities? Thank you.
Okay, and thank you. And I think that's a very important question, because going back to what the Minister said, is we don't want the groups who are not receiving the vaccine to be in the groups who are the most likely to get the infection and die from the disease. So this is so important to ensure we rid London of COVID. I think it's a few things that the Mayor and colleagues need to do. First of all, it's about trust. Is how can we make sure we convey to Londoners in that community that it's safe to take the vaccine. In fact, at the moment today, the Mayor is visiting a Hindu temple in North London to visit the centre to show support for the vaccine uptake in that community. And what we recognise is if you place the vaccine centres within that community, the likelihood of people from that community taking the vaccine increases. So the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we reach out to those communities so the vaccine centres are embedded and based in that community. Secondly, it's about misinformation. It's repeating again and again that the vaccines are safe, they have been tested, and also that we are monitoring in such a careful basis. Look at every single day, any adverse the vaccine is of the utmost. The third thing I think very much is the Mayor and the GLA are doing paid adverts out on social media and in the main press. Because we recognise often the social media is the avenue used for the misinformation about vaccine. Therefore, that's the area we must also counter that misinformation. The Minister and Sadiq over the weekend did an article for the national press. Again, both members of the BAME community reaching out to their fellow BAME kind of community leaders and members to say this vaccine is safe, and it's much more likely that the safety will be considered as vital when the message is being given by people from that community. And that goes to the idea that one of the speakers earlier said about community champions. If we're not having community champions extolling the virtues of the vaccine, it will probably fall on deaf ears. So I think we've got to do a multiplicity of things. But the reason it's so vital is that if this is not addressed, there is a strong risk that parts of London who are the most at risk of getting COVID and dying from COVID will be the ones who are least vaccinated.
Can't hear you, Chairman. Put on your mic.
I have put it on. I had my cat bothering me from background, so I thought I better turn it off. GPs are crucial to this effort. How can confidence in them be increased?
That's quite a loaded question, but I might just pick up on the strand from earlier. So one of the things that we've sort of faced in terms of challenges when we got started with the local vaccination site program was the fact that we couldn't move Pfizer. We were stuck with the characteristics of the vaccine, and it was limited to having to be vaccinated within a very short time frame, sort of 3.5 days from the time it arrived on site. We had to invite the patients, get them in quickly, vaccinate, and that was it. Now with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, the ability to move that vaccine is far more simpler, far more easier because of its characteristics, which means we can take it out of a local vaccination site and into the communities, which is what we're starting to see. So we've got examples of temples, we've got examples of buses, that are being utilized to reach our communities, reaching our hard to reach communities, but also just being able to take that vaccine out into a GP practice, the local GP practice, and like we're seeing at the moment, into the local pharmacy. And that will be the key to increasing uptake in some of the more harder to reach groups at this moment in time. But there's also an absolute right. Okay. There's also an absolute need, though, we're not coding patients who are declining appropriately. We can't even run searches to identify those who are uncertain. So to target our approaches, we need to ensure we've got the right searches and right lists and are able to target those patients appropriately. So we do need some national support with that. Coming to increasing GPs' trust, gosh, I would like to say that all the stats and all the surveys suggest that the GPs are phenomenally the most trusted in the public domain by the public. But there's always more that we can do. And I would like for us to work very closely with councils to improve that.
Thank you very much. Right, that ends my question. Can we move on to question from Assembly Member Dr. Moore?
Thank you very much, Chair. And my first question is for Tom Coffey. Phase 1 of the current COVID-19 vaccination programme covers care home residents, for example, and those over 50. Phase 2 covers the rest of the Jcvi has said, and I quote, vaccination of those at risk of exposure to SARS-CoV-2 due to their occupation could also be a priority in the next phase. So my first question is, what discussions, if any, has the Mayor had with the government over whether to prioritise key workers' COVID-19 vaccination programme? And if so, when should they receive their vaccination?
Thank you for the message. So therefore, Sadiq has in fact written to the government asking that the prioritisation would consider people who are very much public-facing workers. I think there was a lot of applause and commendation for those public sector workers, public-facing workers, especially during the first lockdown, who were going out to serve the communities. They undoubtedly, because of that face-to-face interaction, are more at risk, be it our police officers, be it our teachers, be it our shop workers. And so the Mayor has written to the Secretary of State for Health asking that because of that added exposure, they should be considered for part of the prioritisation process in Wave 2 of the Jcvi programme. So Sadiq has done that. Now, timing-wise, I'm not aware of the detail from the Jcvi when the second wave will begin. Martin who's part of the group, who in fact are the most trusted group. GPs are second to nurses. I know Martin giggled when Dr. Jamil commented how trusted we are. We are very trusted. But Martin may know more about the date when a second wave of the JCVI process will start, because we are running a parallel process. Just as we're getting through our first 1.5 million doses, they've all got to have their second dose. Yeah. So they'll be running that again. And some second doses are only starting in 6 weeks' time. Martin.
Yeah, very quickly, Assembly Member Moore, thank you. So there's 3 parts to a 2-part strategy, as you heard the Minister say. So 1A is up until the middle of February, and that's the top 4 groups. Then 1B is the next 5, and we haven't got yet a target set for us about when that will be, but we are planning on the next 2 to 3 months after the middle of February, but it's a planning assumption at present. And then we'll go into that second stage, third stage, which is other groups. Now, we will be directed, and if the evidence changes and the JCVI tomorrow said, we need you to focus your attention elsewhere because the evidence says so, then the NHS will pivot to do that. We'd like some notice, back to the point that Dr. Jamil has said, but actually we will do as the evidence directs and the JCVI direct, and currently it's those 3 steps we're going to take.
Thank you very much. I had been going to move on to ask you a question, Martin, about that phase 2 vaccine rollout, and obviously teachers and police officers and other critical workers, and of course as a London Assembly member, you know, I'd have an eye on TfL frontline staff and frontline firefighters, as we heard at committee yesterday. So there's a question mark about who could be in the highest category to receive that first dose, though I do recognise the challenge of giving the second doses as well. So do you have any sense where you might see the plans for that phase 2 rollout, and what sort of information is coming through at the moment about prioritisation?
So certainly people are making really strong representation to the JCVI. They recognise that it's not a local decision, and that's probably right, because you do need the world's experts, and we're very lucky in this country, aren't we, to have those, looking at this and spending time doing it and coming to a reasoned, not a personal health response. And we have to see it in terms of the population. I just very quickly, there is I come into the office, into the incident centre here every day about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I have a brief conversation with the guy who sweeps the street. I can make a brilliant case for that guy to have the vaccine today, but he's not in the top 4 groups, he's not in the next 5, and therefore it's right we focus on, and we should hear what comes down.
Thank you, and I hope I'll hand back to the chair in a second, but I hope that we are going to see that particular case around London being argued, because we are such a big and complex city.
Make that case for London, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you very much. Chair, I'll pass back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Dr. Jamil. Good morning. Yes, still good morning. Dr. Jamil, the criteria for vaccination in the United Kingdom has been to protect the NHS. Other countries have prioritized younger people to support the economy. Is that strategy working? Is it the right one? And the reason I'm asking this question is that it is important that Londoners know and understand the scientific and medical evidence upon which we are working.
So I think that's a very challenging, difficult question to try and answer succinctly, but we must follow the scientific evidence and guidance that's being provided, and that strategy is being set by the chief medical officers in consultation, in discussion with independent experts who have analysed all of the evidence in front of them, and that will include things like hospital capacity. It will absolutely include that. So I don't think it's helpful necessarily to suggest that that is the wrong strategy, because what we do know is that there's there's multiple factors involved. I think the question earlier around looking at expanding or reviewing the guidance is important for us to ponder upon and pause, because the guidance was relevant and appropriate when it was issued. And actually what we do know is that things have moved on since. We have new data of admission trends, we have new data on ITU trends, and we have new data on the communities and the age bands with which the second wave has impacted on. And that should and must inform any future strategy in terms of who we prioritize for the vaccinations.
Thank you. Just a follow-up, Dr. Jamil, if I may. We've heard from the government that they are protecting for immunity rather than reducing transmission of the virus. Can you tell us what evidence there has been so far? How are you working with other countries to share learning, and what room there is to maneuver if the evidence changes?
So that wouldn't be...
Yeah, thank you. If that's all right, Mr. Chairman, I'll quickly try and pick that up. We are constantly learning from around the world, and I think your push, Assembly Member, is that we do so. And I can assure you that we do. So only last week, I was in a multi-country seminar of nurses from Italy and Spain and Israel, sharing our best practice, sharing the evidence, both of the vaccination programme and our response to this current wave. And it's really important that we understand that, because as you've heard a number of times today, the evidence isn't just accruing, it is changing as the variants of the vaccine change. So we learn more and more, and we're learning more different things every day. This is, remember, it is only the 30th of January last year that the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. It feels like a lifetime ago, but it's only a year. It is only 8 weeks for the vaccine programme since England started vaccinating, the first in the world. We've got a lot to learn yet, and a lot to learn from other people.
Thank you for those answers. I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Can't hear you.
Assembly Member Qureshi.
Thank you, Chair. Can I address my question to Martin and then Tom? Martin, you informed us earlier that yesterday we had over 1 million Londoners vaccinated with the first jab, and that's great news. But can you give us an estimate of the proportion of Londoners not registered with GPs, and how do we intend to vaccinate them?
Okay, great question. So I couldn't give you an accurate figure. It's very tiny in population terms, but it's a really, really important group. I will write to you and give you that figure. So forgive me, I'm not dodging it, I just don't have it to hand. The very fact that people aren't registered with a GP, and given the great service that I've already talked about of our general practice and primary care, makes them more vulnerable. Be that because they're homeless, because they're asylum seekers, because of all sorts of other reasons that people don't register. And of course, the younger population are just bad at registering. That's another question altogether. But that vulnerability needs to be picked up. Therefore, we have got a strategy for London that will be carried out locally with local adult social services and local authorities to make sure that we work with those communities who we know don't normally register. I'll pick up a couple, but homelessness is one. We have over 900 people who are sleeping on our streets today, and we will work with the great charities like St. Mungo's, Médecins Sans Frontières, and others to reach those 900, and those who are couch surfing or sofa surfing. We've got other groups like traveller groups who aren't registered. We've got groups who are in temporary transitory accommodation, moving week to week, and we have to work with our local systems and charities and our state sector to actually reach them. But we have got the facilities, and it goes back again to great primary care. Where we've got great primary care, we reach those groups well, and we will do with the vaccine.
Okay, well, thank you, Martin, for that response. Can I have a GP perspective now from Tom? Tom, can I just add that whilst Martin has highlighted some of the groups and what have you, when this question was raised in the Commons, the Minister there emphasised that the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government has got a role to play. And I wondered whether, in your response, you could tell us what discussions the Mayor may have had with the Ministry on this pertinent issue.
Okay, so to give you some stats, so for people who are rough sleepers, 25% are not registered with their GP, with a GP, and so that is, you know, a significant proportion. As a GP, what I try to do when someone's who's a rough sleeper or homeless and they haven't got an address is I register them in my practice, so that they need an address on the system. So therefore, I use the please contact this patient by phone, not by letter. So there are ways to get around it to make sure you can, even if someone hasn't, you do not have to prove your ID or your address to register in general practice. Every single Londoner, irrespective of they're homeless, have got no proof of ID, have got a right to register with the GP. And some people feel that isn't the case. That is not true. You can register. So Sadiq has had quite numbers of correspondence with various ministers to try to work out how we can improve the registration of patients with London. In a GLA, we have seconded someone into the GLA health team, someone called Doctors of the World. They're a group who work with refugees and asylum seekers and rough sleepers, and are trying to promote the idea of a registration of this vulnerable group. And Sadiq has felt that we want to try to support this organisation, so someone's on a one-year secondment into the GLA to work how we can communicate to the wider Londoners and the wider GP community, including our GP colleagues, to make sure this does occur.
Well, thank you, Tom. And has the Mayor has had discussions about flexibility in the vaccine deployment at the local level. Can you just give us some idea of what kind of flexibility he's talking about?
I don't think I said that. So therefore, what I've said is that flexibility, how GPs can make sure we register this vulnerable group. The decisions of how people are vaccinated, very much, this is a national programme which Martin and his team implement in London, and accordingly we follow as GPs throughout London this programme. You know, we don't use a flexibility within London which will be different to Manchester or Birmingham.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And can I just make a final plea? We've heard the nurses' perspective and the doctors. I do think our chemists have got a role to play. After all, when I had my flu jab before Christmas, it was not at my GP, it was at my chemist.
Yeah.
I'm sure they can play
Agreed.
Oh, thank you.
Right. Assembly Member McCartney, please.
Yes, thank you. My first question is to Martin McRae, if I can. And we've heard earlier that some Londoners are hesitant to get the vaccine and work's being carried out to build their trust and confidence. But are records being kept consistently across all of London's CCGs of those who have declined the vaccine? And is the capacity in the system in a few months' time to contact those people again whose confidence may have risen?
Yeah, so you'll already have heard in a previous answer, Assembly Member, that actually the GP systems and the systems that we've got when we started this on the 8th of December didn't collect that information, and that's a frustration for us all. Many practices and hospitals have set up local systems to overcome that, but what everyone is really committed to is making sure that we don't give up on any Londoner. That's a really important message. It's back to that conversation I had with the care home manager and her staff about uptake. You don't say one strike and you're out. That is not the NHS's or London's approach to its population. Our approach is to work with people, with communities, and therefore it's vital that we go back and back, not nagging, but go back and be there for when they're ready to make that decision. We are a bit stymied by some of the new systems that have come on place, and they are improving day to day. But that shouldn't override our commitment to do the right thing.
Okay, so there will be capacity in the system later on. That's helpful to know. Yeah, thank you. Can I also ask, there's some reports out that some employers are saying that they will only take new employees who have had the vaccination on a no jab, no job policy. And I'm just wondering, perhaps this is better for Tom, And what's your view of this and how, because there are also some ethical issues with regards to a lot of the debate around vaccines. What is your view on that? And in the public health sphere, is there any discussion about whether it's going to be advisable for all health and from those front-facing workers to have had the jab?
Thank you much. Is that people have got a choice over whether they wish to have a vaccine or not. And I think we've said again and again that trust is vital between the government, the health service and the Londoner regarding the choice to have the vaccine. I think any move towards making it compulsory, I think, will undermine that process.
I agree.
And at the moment, I think it's vitally important that we say very clearly, this vaccine is safe and effective. It will protect you against getting COVID, and it could also protect you from passing COVID onto someone else. We now have got emerging evidence for that. But the key reason we're doing it, because it protects you from getting COVID and becoming seriously unwell with COVID. And I would rather use that message at the moment than any level of coercion, because I think once one goes down the path of coercion, you further undermine potentially the issues of trust, which we know are the main reason now regarding vaccine hesitancy.
Yep, it just strikes me that there might be some work to be done with employers then with regards to this, because otherwise there could be some serious ramifications.
Indeed. Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to ask, and perhaps again for Tom, is that the Danish government announced yesterday that it intends to introduce a digital corona pass, which will allow its citizens to show airlines and other countries that they are up to date with their vaccinations. Is that something that's actively being discussed at the moment in the UK? And again, I can see there will be some implications for that as well with regard to those people who may not want to take, or perhaps have medical reasons as to why they shouldn't and couldn't take the vaccine.
So I'm not aware of those discussions, but but this is a discussion which will be taking at a government level. This is something which risks still of passing on a vaccine on an infection unbeknowingly. So I'm not aware of those discussions to do that in the UK.
No, I haven't heard of any either. But you've already alluded to the significant ethical debate that we need to take.
It's a question from Assembly Member Devenish.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Dr. Tom. Firstly, Dr. Tom, thank you so much for all you've done. You've always been very responsive to my constituents on all health issues, and it is really appreciated. I think now what we've heard this morning, if I can say, is really the NHS is doing a fantastic job, but we need all as a team to communicate some more. And I am amazed that the Mayor's not here this morning because, he was always banging on about being a son of a bus driver till we all remembered that nice, simple phrase. And I've been very keen to hear when you've been talking about the hesitancy rate this morning and how we need to get that hesitancy rate down. So my question to you, Dr. Tom, really is, can we follow some of the best practice across London that, for example, last night Westminster Council held a cross-party communication session with Lord Simon Woolley, Professor Kevin Fenton and Councillor Rachel Robertson, spoke to over 350 Westminster residents to alleviate any concerns they may have. Will you, number one, make sure all 33 London boroughs are doing similar work? Will you get various sports stars, I mentioned the footballer earlier, but sports stars, faith leaders and others to help us communicate this message? And I noticed the Camden GP that's on the call referred to buses being used. I've not seen a bus, I must admit, with the messages going around London. Do you know how many London buses have got these reassurance measures on? And is there anything else we can do with the media to try and get these messages across and repeat? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Assemblyman Devenish. And obviously you're a bit of a communications expert because I think you've just described the plan we actually are doing. So the town hall type assembly meetings which you mentioned happened last night, in fact, are being planned to happen throughout the boroughs in London, because we feel that's a really good local way of getting the message across that this is a safe and effective vaccine. The mayor today, I'm aware, is at the Hindu temple in North London, trying to communicate the message that you've described by, to the local communities who are vaccine. So I think he would share your ambition to communicate continually through all the different vehicles, be it town hall type meetings, probably on Zoom, via the social media, via the mainstream media, in interviews he does on a daily basis, that without this communication, we're not going to address the vaccine hesitancy. Without addressing the vaccine hesitancy, we'll not get a coverage in London that makes it safe again for London. So I think your wish, desire and clarion call for communication, I think will land on very fertile ears for Sadiq.
Thank you. My second and final question, what is the Mayor and the Met Police doing to really clamp down on social media anti-vaxxers?
So now, I don't claim to have a sufficient detail to an answer to that one, Assemblymember Devenish, but what I'm very aware is that Sadiq sees on a regular basis how the social media is often the main vehicle for putting out this anti-vax message, but also putting out clear and utter misinformation. So, it's a view which he would share with you. I can't answer in any detail the actual exact things he's done thereafter, but I can find out for you and get back to you.
Thank you. I'd say if you could write to me in the Assembly on that important point, I'd be very keen to hear the answer. And thank you once again for all you and your are doing. It hugely appreciated, Dr. Tom. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I've talked to Dr. Tom around what is being done to look at where this information is coming from. There's certain communities, certainly my own, that actually feel like we are under attack. It feels like a very deliberate, very concerted effort to put this information out into our community. And I wonder if there is any work being done, and I take your comment, it might be slightly outside of your purview, but can you go back and look at where this information is coming from, particularly as we still have to allow free speech. People are entitled to their opinions maliciously coming from, because some of the things I've seen circulated in my community are infomercials. They're very, people are sat down and taking their time to do it. So my specific question is, are you aware of any work being done to see if this information is being deliberately by groups or individuals pushed out into our communities? And if not, would you make the suggestion to the Mayor that this work should be done?
Okay. So, thank you for that question, Assembly Member Bailey. So I am aware that there is some national work, and in fact, as you point out, this isn't kind of someone in a very amateurish way creating a 10-second piece for the social media. Some people are sitting down and spending hours creating very malicious, very professional information, which is deliberately designed to undermine the confidence in the vaccine. And because it's done in a very professional and serious way, it has resonance with people. It tends to try to naturally pick up a level of distrust and work on that. Mm-hmm. So I think that the point you make, the description you make is so spot on. And I think just as I answered Tony Devenish, the same for you, I'll take that back to the Mayor and say, there's a real clear message here that we need to address this professional plan to undermine the confidence in this vaccine. And we can't, it won't, perhaps it'll be insufficient just to say they're wrong. We've got to find out.
Of course, he never knew COVID was coming, of course not. But we are, I think as a nation, and certainly in London, we could do more for people's comfort around flu jabs, around MMR, all of these kind of things. The Mayor has a role in health inequalities in London. One of the biggest inequalities is the take-up of vaccine. So what additional piece of work with the learnings from the COVID uptake can we do into the future to make sure that Londoners are just more comfortable with attending to their own health anyway?
And I think what I would say to that is that, in fact, the Mayor being very aware of that. In fact, he has had his flu jab, and not only has he had it, he's made sure it's been done in a very public way to show that him, as a member of the BAME community in London, who is eligible for the flu jab, will have it done is confident in its safety and effectiveness and will have it done publicly. So he does try to make sure he uses his personal behaviour to demonstrate to Londoners that vaccination is safe.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you, and good morning. If I can address the first one to Dr. Coffey. Going on from what my colleague, Assemblymember Bailey, was saying, that one of the problems we obviously have is that some of the anti-vaxxers genuinely believe what they're saying. I know there's a lot of mischief going on, but some of them do. Is there any prospect, or is anybody thinking of getting them onto Zoom calls and saying, right, you throw what you're saying to me and we'll explain to you why it's not correct? Because we listen to our own colleague. He genuinely believes what he's saying. I don't think any of the other Assembly members do. But we've got to get to this, because in some cases it might be malicious. I genuinely believe in lots of cases it's not malicious. They just have not got the right information.
Yeah, and so what I would say is, for the vast majority of people, and this is what Martin said, it's vaccine hesitancy. The tiny, tiny group are the people who are thing that will give that person confidence to have the vaccine. So vaccine hesitancy of the group who are declining at the moment is much larger than people who are clear anti-vaxxers. Martin might have some information about, is there any more national work? So that small group of anti-vaxxers.
So there's a national team that is challenging and trying to stem false information, and that's good to happen. We have to focus on the positive message that vaccination and immunisation brings to our communities. And I want to pick up from the previous question. In London, we've got to get over these structural inequalities that we've had over many years, and we've all got a lot to learn. Not just one of us, not one particular group. All of us have a lot to learn from this last few months. And I've learned an awful lot, probably more than anyone, in all truth. So I want to build on this and make sure we do that. I wanted people to focus and remember that it's vaccinations and immunisations that wiped out smallpox from this world. It's vaccinations and immunisation that meant me as a generation, when I was born, don't have polio. It means that I didn't get TB, because in the 60s when I was born, I was inoculated against that. And we still got TB, but we know how to treat it now. So vaccines are world-saving. And we've really got to focus on those positive messages. I don't want to give airtime to lies and misinformation. I want to focus on the positives of vaccines, and the COVID vaccine in particular.
I agree with you there, Martin. The only thing is, sometimes you have to give airtime in order to disprove what's being said. It's where people pick up their information we really need to be very sure of, and then go in there. If I can stay with you, Martin, and I thank you, because every week I have a discussion with you over all this, and very, very grateful for all that. What percentage of our health workers in London do you think have been vaccinated?
Okay, so not enough, but let me give you a percentage. Care and health workers are one of the priority groups. 4% uptake amongst all those groups. That's everyone from domiciliary care workers who work for agencies, social workers, right through to ITU nurses. So I can't give you a breakdown in between. That's not enough. And we've got 2 more weeks to get far more. Well, we've got more than that, but the next 2 weeks we are going to concentrate on that group as much as the other 3 cohorts.
Well, but that is good news, though. That's quite I mean, how many people would that equate to, very approximately?
Now it's a mental health test. It's around 400,000 we're aiming to reach. Around, so please, it is an estimate that, but it's around 400,000.
Fair enough. Well, a very good challenge, and you've risen to that. How soon are you expecting the ICUs to be back to some sort of normal working? Because they've been greatly expanded, haven't they?
So, yes, they have, and they still are greatly expanded. Last night we had over 1,500 people in ITUs in London, and of those, remember, our normal bed base in a critical care unit is we've got 800 beds in London. So twice as many as we normally have or have capacity for. That's huge. So that's nooks and crannies, that's wards converted. We hope that the demand for ITU will mirror the drop in infection rates that we are now seeing. The challenge, however, is that because we're better at treating people, people are staying longer in hospital, and therefore the decline is going to be more gradual than the decline in the infection in the community. And therefore we're looking over February, March and April of still being enormously busy with COVID cases that have come in today. And that's why it's so important that these restrictions beyond the vaccine continue. What we hope to see very soon is some data that will tell us how effective the vaccine has been in keeping people out of hospital. And I'm very confident we'll see some positive news, but I haven't seen it yet. But it's going to be a long recovery period. And sorry to take this opportunity, but can I thank my 70,000 nurses and midwives who work in London, particularly because they are, like other health professionals, have absolutely given their all and are exhausted, and I'm asking them to do more.
Well, the thanks goes from all of the Assembly, let me assure you. We're all very, very
I appreciate that, thank you.
As the numbers come down on COVID, please God, and it'll be very interesting to see those figures coming through, are we going to be looking at in London for perhaps specific hospitals to be dealing with COVID? Because obviously there's going to be such a backlog of other important things coming through where people will need to go into these specialist units, and it would be good to keep COVID out of hospitals where possible. So is there any prospect of that?
So I slightly turn it, but it's the same intent. When we came out of the first wave, we knew that we had a lot of people waiting for elective waiting list treatments, and we needed to get on top of that. So we made sure that there were certain sites in our general hospitals that we would describe as a green zone, one that was COVID secure and could keep patients going through in confidence that that they were COVID-free throughout that process and could manage that. That's not about turning our hospitals into COVID and non-COVID, but it's about making sure that specific sites within our infrastructure can deal with that COVID-safe environment. And yet when you are in the urgent care pathway and you're waiting for your tests and all that, you've got to have other different sorts of restrictions. So yes, we will go back to having places, and we still have today. So if you are going in for emergency cardiac or cancer surgery, you can be sure that you are COVID safe in going through those processes. And we've worked really hard to keep them that, even in this wave.
Okay, thank you, Martin. One last question to Dr. Tom, if I can, or perhaps Dr. Jamil. We are told to constantly report anything to our doctors if we're poorly or if we think we might have cancer symptoms, and that's coming across loud and clear. But I would say, and I've got this from lots of other people, getting hold of your GP is not as easy in any which way as it used to be. So if anybody that's watching this or hears about this, how would you suggest they go about it if they have trouble getting hold of their GP?
I'll start, but I think Dr. Jamil, might want to just conclude. So the reason that we've moved very much to a telephone first system is because what we didn't want is people in the waiting room giving each other COVID. We knew that would be an utter disaster. However, when you have a system of telephone first, it puts an extra barrier between you and the patient making the appointment. We recognise that, and we get stories of patients waiting on telephone lines for ages trying to get through to get that telephone assessment. So, but the key message is that as a GP, we're there 8 till 8, in my practice, 5 days a week, and we have weekend services, seeing our patients. And it is, please call your GP out of hours, call 111. We are there to see you still. But Dr. Jamil, she may have an added perspective.
Thanks very much. And I think more importantly, even before the pandemic, the way patients were able to access the GP setting and services had been changing with appropriate segmentation orientation of the patient and direction of the patient to the right person who could help them at the right time in the quickest possible way. And certainly with the pandemic, what happened was almost like a donning of electronic PPE and organizing patients, organizing a different route for how patients might access services by ringing up their GP or by filling out e-consultation forms. But the point is the GP is still there. And the whole practice team is still there, assessing, looking through those forms, and still speaking to patients, and still seeing the patients who need to be seen and assessed in a timely fashion. So whilst it might look and feel slightly different at this moment in time,
not been that case for very, very many people. So I hope as soon as we start easing out of this, life will go back to something as it was before, because it isn't working for everybody now. But thank you anyway. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank Tom Coffey in the way he answered Councillor Devonish and Sean Bailey's questions on it. And we do have to differentiate between the vulnerable and those that are playing fears on them with fake information, because we know this fake information and this very professionally organised information will cost lives. If people are taken in by misinformation, wrong information, people will die on the back of it. Chair, I hope we could go offline and help and support the Mayor of London and government in combating the sinister nature of some of this information and where it's coming from, because it needs to be exposed. If I can put my questions to Martin McRae very quickly. I think you, Chair, raised an issue about numbers and take-up. Martin, there is confusion with different figures banded up, and I'm grateful in how you answered Assembly Member Hall's question. Can you just give us the exact take-up figures of where we are in London with the vaccine and how they are validated? Just to quickly take us through that process. I've got some other follow-up questions.
Martin, you're on mute.
Thank you. The data comes from a number of sources. And just to simplify it, there are three ways in which the vaccine is being delivered. One through primary care, which we've talked a lot about, checked, validated, quality of the data is improved. I'm more interested in the operational data that comes to me instantly so I can plan for the next week ahead. So when I say 1,114,000, that's the data I was given last night in which to do my job today. So it'll be a day or two before you see that figure land nationally on a government website, but it will be there. It will be there. Just to give you a breakdown, so the four groups, I'm going to give you percentages because the numbers will be different already. Yep. The percentages are important. And again, I'm going to have to hope my arms are long enough, and that will teach me to go to the other important part of primary care, which is your optometrist. I need an eye test. So, care home residents, we have reached all care homes for the elderly and have been in and offered the vaccine to everyone who is eligible to have it. There are some people who are not eligible because they've had COVID very recently or are too unwell for other reasons, and therefore 79.5% of care home residents have had the first dose of the vaccine, but we need to wait for people to be ready to have it. Secondly, care staff, which is the figure I gave to Assembly Member Hall before, and that's 61.4%. Of the over 80s, the figure I've got in front of me is 80%. Now that's behind the rest of London, the rest of the country, but is a phenomenal achievement given normal vaccine uptake in this group for flu and things like that. That's much better than flu is normally. And then the age, I've got the over 70s split by two age groups, so forgive me, I'm not going to add it up. For 75 to 79-year-olds, it is 80.5%, and for 70 to 74-year-olds, it's 68.9%. That's my operational data of last night.
Thank you. Let me just now turn to issues around messaging and the slight concern. Look, we all want to come out of what happened last time. The vaccine is a game changer and it saves people's lives, but we know this virus is highly infectious. There's going to be a differential impact. And of course, you know, being very clear about this next stage, once people have got the vaccine, of understanding how they go about their lives and why there may well be some form of guidance, regulations that we still need to have in place. We're not going to come out of this for some time. Is there work going on in government to explain that? And my secondary issue in terms of that is them worrying about what does this mean for key workers working in certain areas. So if we can save lives if you've got the vaccine, and those who choose not to have the vaccine may disproportionately have a higher risk of dying. It's simple as that, isn't it? Instead of dying, depending on which age group they're in. But even we're seeing younger people dying, might not be in the numbers at the at-risk group, but there are in these new variants where it's having an effect on that. And we ought to be honest about that. I don't want to raise fear of that, but that has been an impact, I think you said. So the question then is, how do we manage the workplace in the next phase of these issues? If a number of people go down with infections and are taken out of the workplace, because, you know, at the moment it seems that we've had some of that and we've managed it well. The NHS is a good example of where they've had people that have had to isolate, go out and come out the system, and we've managed to keep going. Is that still an issue that is of concern to the professionals in this area over the next phase once we roll out the vaccine?
Thank you. Some of the question is best answered by public health experts, as you will understand, of which I'm not. I can give you a nursing professional view about how we see the application of these social measures now. And let's all hope it opens up very, very quickly. But let's do it in a measured way, and I think social measures will be needed to make that safe to do so. I know that if you are a staff nurse coming home from ITU after a 12-hour shift on your feet in those hazmat suits that you see wearing all that kit, and you see someone not following the rules, it either makes you want to weep or your blood boil. And so many nurses, so many doctors, so many healthcare professionals have told me the emotion they feel when they see people not following the rules, having seen what they've just seen in their clinical practice. It is always a balance between health and wealth, but the two are synonymous in many ways, and we want to get back to where we've got a vibrant, brilliant city in the way that we all love it. But we do need to do that safely on the evidence we've got. And I think there are discussions going on about what those restrictions will be. They should be national, that's absolutely right. And your leadership, your political input into that is really important. But I think we need to just keep saying now, hands, face, space, and ventilate. Follow those rules, and you look after yourself and your loved ones. We've learned a lot, finally, from experience of it being in the workplace as healthcare professionals. I've had to be in the workplace. You can't not be as a nurse or a doctor. And we've learned a lot about how to restrict. And the thing we've learned most is the tenacity you need as a member of the workforce to keep following those rules. And lastly, with the rollout of the vaccine, which is going in the right direction, even though we're slightly behind in the rest of the country, if track and trace is still key to tackling this infection. So I think on test, the testing regime has improved, has come a long way. So I think we're moving in the right direction of that. And I know you're not a public health official, but in terms of tracing, am I right that tracing is key now to control outbreaks of infection, maybe in smaller locations? So is the tracing regime, is the tracing, some of it's local government led, is it moved entirely to local government led now? And should that not be to take some of the pressure off the NHS to give us that localised issue around what the thinking may be about how this virus operates post-vaccine era, if I can call it that? Very quickly, I've observed that move towards local partnership on track and trace and isolate happening as we speak, and it's really important we do that. There's a role for national colleagues in this, but there's definitely a bigger role to play locally.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, you're on mute.
Thank you. Right. I haven't noticed or been asked about any further questions. So that ends our session on question and answer.
Chair,
Yeah.
I believe I have 6 seconds left.
Well, please go ahead.
Is it important to complete the JCVI priority list as is? To Tom Coffey.
Adam time now, isn't it?
So therefore, we need to follow the JCVI unless the JCVI changes their present advice.
Thank you. Okay, that definitely brings an end to our question and answer session. Can I sincerely thank all our 3 guests for taking their time, doing enormous amount of service, giving their service to keep Londoners safe in this crisis that we have historic proportion. Thank you very much for sparing your invaluable time, and well, let us hope to see you in a better environment.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. We have further business to continue, so please do feel free to leave the team's and London Assembly. Okay, can we turn to the motion in my name, which is, can I ask the Assembly to note the answers to the questions asked?
Noted.
Thank you very much. Next item is petitions. Can I ask Assembly Member Leonie Cooper to present the petitions listed on the agenda in her name? Assembly Member Cooper. Hello. Right. Whilst we wait for Assembly Member Cooper, can I ask the Assembly to note the response received to a petition presented at the Assembly plenary on 5th of November?
Noted.
Noted. Can we see if Assembly Member Cooper is about to present her petition? Okay, let's move on